CGC Sports Illustrated podcast episode number 3. I'm going to cover 2 topics today, and I'm covering these 2 topics because you asked for them. I get a lot of comments, emails, DMs, and these 2 topics keep coming up most and most. So the single most question I get asked about is the difference between subscription issues and newsstand issues and everything around that. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about subscription issues and newsstand issues. The second topic I'm going to cover today is about investing, but I'm going to do it in a little bit different way than what I've done in the past. Someone asked me to break down the most collectible issues by era, and I thought it was a really good question because when you submit issues to CGC to be graded, they break them out into 2 separate eras. So today I'll cover the most collectible issues from the first issue of 1954 through 1974. On my next podcast, I'll do 1975 through today. And like I said, there's a specific reason why I'm breaking it up that way. And you can see here, this is the CGC website. That's because CGC views the 2 different magazine grading eras like this. As you can see here, they classify magazines from 1975 to present day. Those are called modern. And then there's pretty much everything else. And this is important because depending on what year the magazine came out, it will fall into one of these categories with different pricing and different turnaround times. You can see right here, modern issues. This is the fee to have it graded, $28. Current turnaround time, 67 days. Economy, standard, and walkthrough is everything else. I'm not going to get into big details about that, but CGC breaks up the way they grade different eras into those 2 separate kind of divisions. So we'll handle it in my countdown of the most collectible issues with 2 separate issues, 2 separate eras. So let's start with the first that we were going to talk about, and that is subscription versus newsstand. And this is going to lead nicely into the topic of collectibility and why. Subscription versus newsstand is easily the biggest point of confusion in this hobby. So I'm probably going to keep talking about this for a long time, and maybe someday, eventually, it'll help clear up some of this confusion. The 2 definitions I think are fairly self-explanatory on the surface, but when you dig in, there are some certain variables. Subscription issues have had a subscription mailing label on the front, either currently or at one point in time. When you subscribe to the magazine, they mailed it to your house. That's a subscription issue. Newsstand issues, you could only purchase at a store back in the day when they had newsstands, and they never had a mailing label on them. It's the only difference in the magazines. Everything else is exactly the same. They both have barcodes. They both have everything else associated with a typical magazine. There's another thing to watch out for, and that is empty subscription boxes with no address label information printed on them. So you can see here, we're looking at a Payton Manning's second Sports Illustrated issue. It's got the subscription box, it's white, and there's no address label on them. These are generally referred to as white box subscription issues. Got the white box on the cover, but there's no mailing information in there. It is still classified as a subscription issue. If you mail a white box issue to CGC to be graded, and even if there's no address on there or no name or anything like that, like this example that we're looking at, it will still come back with subscription edition on the CGC label next to the number grade. Now, why is this important, this whole distinction over subscription versus newsstand? It goes back to collectibility. And I thought it would be a good idea to use sports cards as kind of an analogy. Sports cards that were produced in the 80s and most of the 90s, that's generally referred to as the junk wax era. Now, that is not a nice term, junk wax, and it's totally deserving of sports cards from that era. Cards from that era are pretty much junk, and they're not worth very much. Now, why is that? It's the first rule of business and any collectible. It's simply supply and demand. The card manufacturers cranked out millions and millions of copies of those cards. Whenever there's millions of something in a collectible market, it's pretty much worthless. So let's take that example and apply it to collecting Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated themselves has come out and said they produced about 2.5 million to 3 million copies of every single issue every single week. Millions of junk wax cards are out there and they're worthless. Millions of subscription issues of Sports Illustrated are out there and they're not worth very much and not very collectible. Okay, so why are newsstand issues valuable? Again, let's go back to what Sports Illustrated has come out and said. They've said that only 2 to 3% of every run printed every week were set aside as newsstand issues for retail purchase. So if you just do the quick math on that, 2 to 3% of 2 to 3 million is about 60,000 newsstand issues produced each week. This makes newsstand issues very rare, even more rare when graded, and almost one of a kind, and actually literally one of a kind in a lot of specific situations. So especially if they're graded at a high level. So here's a perfect example. I'll show you. This is from my personal collection. This is a Walter Payton. This is the issue that came out in 1999 after he passed away from cancer. It's graded at a 9.4. There's several of these graded out there, but this is a pop 1 of 1 with none higher. There's only one of these in the entire world, and I'm holding it in my hand right now. So let's go back to sports cards. Go into PSA and you can pull up the population reports. Tell me how many pop 1 of 1, none higher cards out there with a huge Hall of Fame superstar like Walter Payton. There's not many, if any at all. And the ones that are extremely collectible. Now, collecting Sports Illustrated isn't anywhere near as popular as collecting sports cards. The highest graded issue of Michael Jordan's rookie card in existence from his 1983 Sports Illustrated issue is it's graded at a 9.6. If that were to come on the market today, it'd probably be worth $25,000 to $50,000. We all know Michael Jordan's PSA 10 Fleer rookie card is going for over $500,000. So certainly Sports Illustrated is not as collectible and as popular as sports cards, but there are certain parallels that we can draw between the two hobbies. So that's the difference between subscription issues and newsstand issues and how each affects their collectability. So now let's dig into some specifics about how to identify subscription issues and some things to watch out for. I'd say the biggest thing you've got to watch out for are subscription issues where the mailing label has been removed. And this happens quite a lot. Oh, here's another example of a Sports Illustrated with a white box. You can see this Tom Brady issue graded. It's labeled subscription issue, subscription edition, says so right at the top. We can see that. Subscription edition, right there. It's a white label. There's no address in it. Sports Illustrated classifies it as a subscription edition, dramatically reduces the collectability of that issue. So, you know, you can generally easily spot. By the way, this is what an issue looks like. You can see this. This is my example. This is the first of the modern swimsuit issues from 1964. You can see that this is a newsstand issue because it doesn't say subscription edition up there. This is a newsstand issue, and that's why it's going to be dramatically more collectible. Now, when it comes time to spotting subscription issues, you know, most of the time you can spot them pretty easily. So here's a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. This is a May 5th, 1980 issue. You can see that, you know, part of the subscription label has been torn off and part of it's still on there. That's a really easy one to spot. Sometimes you'll see examples where there is some glue residue. So here's a Wayne Gretzky issue from 1985. Now there's no label, but if we hover over it and it zooms in, you can clearly see there, right by Wayne's shoulder, that we've got some glue residue on the cover. Sometimes you can see scratch marks where people have tried to, you know, peel the label off and that sort of thing, like we saw on the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar example. Again, it will come back as a subscription edition. CGC will label that. You can see that here on this example. It said subscription edition on the CGC label. Now, there are others that there's no way that you can tell to the naked eye that the subscription label has been removed. Some of these are really, really difficult to spot. A couple important points about labels being removed. I can't say this more firmly. CGC will catch this during the grading process every single time. It doesn't matter if you look at it and you can't see any glue residue, you can't see any subscription label, you can't see any defect whatsoever. If there has ever been a mailing label on it, CGC will catch it. Always, always, always. I myself have been fooled several times before. I looked over the issue extremely carefully. I saw absolutely no evidence that there had ever been a label on this issue. No evidence whatsoever. I mean, immaculate, clean issue. Sent it to CGC. It came back with that dreaded subscription edition right there by the grade, just like you can see on this Michael Jordan example. I was crushed when this happened because graded issues that say subscription edition on the CGC label just really aren't all that collectible. So you've got to know what's going on and what's going into this every time you get an issue, and you need to examine it closely for any signs of a mailing label being removed. And even if you think that it's a newsstand issue, there's always a risk that it's not, and CGC will label it a subscription issue. For me, that's kind of the fun of this hobby. I mean, doing this is hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it, and these wouldn't be collectible. They're collectible because this is hard, and finding good ones is rare. So sourcing newsstand issues, which I'll talk about in a minute, hunting them down, taking the risk, not knowing if this is really a newsstand issue, if the label's been removed, but knowing what to look for, knowing which issues are more collectibles than others, evaluating a raw issue on the potential grade that you think CGC is going to give it, taking all that information into account, and then deciding which issues to send in to be graded by CGC, and then waiting. And by the way, CGC is like 4 to 6 months out on their grading by the time you ship them into them, waiting for CGC to grade them, knowing that I may have sent in a subscription issue. All of that is part of the fun for me. It's hard. And that's why the good ones are so collectible. And again, if it's easy, everybody would do it. And none of these graded issues would be worth very much if it's easy. So collectible newsstand issues are worth a lot of money because they are rare. And in many instances, they're literally one of a kind, one in the entire world. And that's what I love about this, is that for a reasonable amount of money, you can have an absolute one of a kind collectible, literally unique. Something to keep an eye on, don't be fooled by an occasional one-off high dollar sale of a subscription issue. Every now and then I'll see a graded issue that's labeled, like we see here, subscription edition, and I'll see it sell for a surprising amount of money. And I'm like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? This is likely somebody that bought it that really doesn't understand the market and the hobby. The buyer may not understand the difference between subscription and newsstand. And they made an impulse buy. Now, I get it. If somebody wants to spend $50 on a graded subscription issue because they think it'll look cool on display in their office or in their man cave, I totally get that. There are going to be one-off subscription issues that are graded, that are sold for a surprising amount of money. It's pretty uncommon. And like I said, it's probably somebody buying it that really doesn't understand the hobby. Let's talk about another point of confusion. I get this question a lot too. So if we look at our next example here, so I get people that say, okay, well, what if you see where it says like subscription insert right underneath the date? So that doesn't mean that this is a subscription edition. Again, if it's going to be a subscription edition, it's going to be over on the left near the number grade. When you see like this example that I've got pulled up, this is an Andrew Luck graded issue. And right underneath where it says December 3rd, 2012, it says subscription, comma, Ralph Lauren inserts. This just means that this issue has those little pieces of paper still in the magazine. Usually when you open up the magazine and dump it out, the little subscription things fall out, asking for people to, sign up and subscribe to Sports Illustrated. That's all it is. Sometimes you'll see some other advertisement cards. I mean, remember back in the day that putting those cards with like cologne scent in the magazine was really popular. It has nothing to do with being labeled a subscription issue or a newsstand issue. It just means that those little cards are still in the magazine. Whether they're in the magazine or not, I have never seen it really affect the value or the collectability, but CGC certainly notes that, and it's something to be aware of. So you'll see that subscription insert card. It'll always be under the date. When it says subscription edition, it'll be over there by the number grade. Another question that I get a lot is, where do I find my newsstand issues that I send in to get graded? And I'll go back to what I said before. It's a lot of hard work. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. I probably look at, 500 or 1,000 Sports Illustrated issues for every one issue that I end up purchasing. eBay is obviously the single best place, but I bought issues off of Mercari and bought several there. And if you're not familiar with Mercari, it's kind of like eBay or Facebook. It's a Facebook marketplace. It's a separate standalone app for buying and selling. I bought issues off of Facebook Marketplace. I bought issues off of Craigslist, Sports Illustrated, Facebook groups, different groups you can join on Facebook, garage sales, estate sales. Tell your friends and family, that may not pay off very often, but let your friends and family know that you've gotten into this hobby and to be on the lookout for you. You never know when a friend of a friend knows somebody who's moving and is cleaning out their house and looking to get rid of stuff. So that's a good way to do it too. Something to keep in mind. I mean, I buy, a lot of issues online, but there's always a risk when you buy online or any place where you're not holding the magazine and looking at it before you buy it. I'd say that about 50% of the issues that I buy online, I don't end up sending in to be graded by CGC. Now, why is that? There's a lot of reasons. What looks good in a picture on eBay can sometimes be junk when it shows up in the mail. Poor shipping from sellers. This is a big one. Shipping magazines correctly is really hard to do. A lot of sellers, even when I ask nicely for them, hey, can you please ship it carefully? And I'm happy to explain how to ship a magazine. Sometimes they'll just throw a magazine in an envelope and drop it in the mail. And that's how you get damaged corners and bent pages and torn pages. Why else do I only end up grading about half the issues I buy online? Some issues I buy online even end up being subscription issues, and I can tell. Some of them, even when they're marketed and sold as newsstand issues, when it ends up showing up in the mail, I can sit here and go, nope, this is a subscription issue. And no matter how closely I look at a picture on a website, I may think it's a newsstand. I may buy the issue. When it arrives, I see the glue residue. I see the scratches. Others, some issues I purchased that the pictures look great online, but they've had major flaws. There's a ton of reasons. But again, I'd say about 50% of the raw issues I buy online, I never get graded, never send them in because it's not worth it. And that's because I know, through my experience in doing this, that CGC is going to give it a low grade and it's not going to be collectible. So just all these things you got to keep in mind. There's a risk to buying online. So quick recap on this. First, this is hard work. You have to we have to look at a lot of issues. You have to do your research on why an issue might be collectible. Second, issues that you purchase without physically holding in your hand might not be in as good a condition as you think they are, and might not end up being as collectible as you think they are. Okay, so now let's talk about collectibility. So let's dig into this one. These are, in my opinion, the best Sports Illustrated issues to collect from 1954 when the magazine started to 1975. The next podcast, I'll do 1975 to current. And let's talk about what I mean when I say an issue is collectible. When I say collectible, what I mean is these are issues that have either the most value now or the strongest potential upside in the future. And many of these really won't be a big surprise, maybe one or two, but most of them will seem obvious, but I think it's important to go through them anyway. I mentioned this in my last podcast. You may have loved, Larry Johnson, the NBA player who played for the UNLV and the Charlotte Hornets. He was a really good player. He was a lot of fun to watch in college and the pros. But he's just not that collectible. And so, finding the right star is always, always, always important. Another interesting point when it comes to collectible is well, look at this example. So you can see this. So this is a Sports Illustrated issue from 1954, and it's about Horseback riding. You've got to remember that when SI came out in the 50s, it covered sports like baseball, football, and all that stuff. But in the first few years, the majority of sports they covered were stuff like sailing and rodeo and horseback riding, pheasant hunting, dog breeding, deep sea diving. There's an issue out there from the mid 50s where the guy had like that full metal helmet on his head in deep sea diving. It's very rare these issues are collectible. So just something to keep in mind. Just because it's a Sports Illustrated and it's from the mid 50s and it's in great shape, that does not mean it's collectible. So here are the issues that I think are most collectible. Here's how I did this. I went through and viewed every single Sports Illustrated cover from 1954 when it started through 1974. I think on my first pass, I came out to about 50 issues, and that was too many. And so I went back through them again, and I cut it down to 30, and then went through again and cut out 10 more. And so this is my top 20. Again, this is just my opinion. I'm sure if you ask somebody else, you'll get a completely different list on what they think is collectible. So I guess you get what you pay for on this podcast. By the way, feel free to disagree with me. Leave a comment, send me an email, DM me, whatever. Tell me I'm wrong. It's no big deal. Let's have a good conversation about it. By the way, we're going to look at these in chronological order. So this isn't a countdown like, the 20 most collectible, the second most collectible. Nope. This is in chronological order, starting from 1954 and going to 1974. So as I've got pulled up the very first issue, no surprise, hugely collectible. Eddie Matthews on the cover, a Hall of Famer, makes it even more collectible. I've talked about this on previous podcasts. The population reports on this issue are through the roof, and the reasons why. There are a ton of these issues out there graded, something around 150 and over 40 now at 9.8. Doesn't seem to matter. These are selling for around $5,000 these days in 9.8. So the very first issue, highly collectible and no big surprise. Okay, so this is the first quote unquote swimsuit issue. And there's some debate as to when the first swimsuit issue is, because Sports Illustrated released a swimsuit issue in 1954, 1955, and 1957, and then didn't start back up again until the 60s. But this one is the first one, and it's hugely collectible. Heritage Auction just sold one graded at 9.0, which had several above that graded higher. And it sold for between $2,000 and $3,000. So very, very collectible. Ted Williams is next. This is from 1955. It's his first appearance. No surprise. I think this is a great picture. It's some things that will affect the collectability of issues. Even if it's a huge star's first appearance, there may be other people on the cover with them. It might not be a clean, front shot where you can see the star's face. It may be like their back or something like that. All of those things affect the collectability, but not this one. I mean, it's the Boston Red Sox, huge fan base. It's Ted Williams, highly, highly collectible, and makes the top 20. This is Willie Mays' first appearance. Now, there's a couple of other people on the issue. I don't think it detracts that much. You got a beautiful, clean shot of Willie Mays there. This is from April 11th in 1955. Willie Mays, highly, highly collectible in the older ones. To nobody's surprise, Mickey Mantle, still, one of the top 3 in sports collectibles of all time, along with, Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan. This is his first appearance in June 1956. You will see grades in the 7 to 7.5 range sell for a couple $1,000s. There are grades in the 8, 8.5, and 9 range that if they were to come on the market, I haven't seen one on the market ever. They'd be upwards of $5,000 to $10,000 if they were to sell. So Mickey Mantle, highly collectible. Let's talk about this one. So this is Johnny Unitas, and this is his first appearance on Sports Illustrated cover. It's collectible. It's very collectible. Something that I think that holds this issue back, though, is the fact that this is not an actual photo of Johnny Unitas. This is an artist rendering, a drawing or a painting or, colored pencils or whatever of Johnny Unitas. I've seen that. I get the sense, and Sports Illustrated does that a lot throughout the years. I get the sense that those issues are not as collectible as they would have been if this had been an actual photograph. All of that said, this is a very difficult issue to find in a high grade. I don't think there's maybe one at an 8 or above. Very hard to find in a high grade. Very collectible. There aren't a whole lot of issues out there where I'd say, yeah, if that was graded a 5 or a 5.0, that'd still be really collectible. This is one of them. In any grade, this Johnny Unitas issue is very collectible. So we moved up to, what's the date here? This is 1960. Don't forget about the golf guys. So this is Arnold Palmer's, or I'm sorry, Jack Nicklaus's, Arnold Palmer, sorry. Arnold Palmer's first Sports Illustrated cover in 1960. Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Tiger Woods. Those are about the only 3 guys in golf that are collectible, but that one's highly collectible. Jim Brown. So this is his first cover in 1960. Again, like I talked about with Johnny Unitas, all the same things apply. Very difficult to find in a high grade. I think there's one 8.5 out there, maybe a 9.0, and that's it. Most of the graded issues are in the 5, 6, 7 range. Highly collectible. But again, I think because this is an artist drawing of Jim Brown, might not have the collectability as it would as if it was his full photograph on there. Bart Starr. This is, if I zoom in here, September 25th, 61. I mean, the Packer fan base is huge. They tend to be collectors. The Packers are just very collectible. Bart Starr's a Hall of Famer. He's very collectible. This is his first issue from 1961 and makes the list today. I like this issue, kind of. This is Wilt Chamberlain, his first issue back when he was still in the ABA. It's October 30th, 1961. I just think this is goofy for his first issue. Still really collectible, but the coach is up front and center. And even the way they do the picture. I mean, Wilt's like 7 feet tall, but he doesn't really look it in this image. And a 7-footer was rare back then. Now, you know, everybody's got a 7-footer, but, you know, he was like the tallest guy in the league back then. Kind of an odd issue, still very collectible. Wilt Chamberlain's very first issue. No surprise here. This is Muhammad Ali's first issue in 1963 when he was still named Cassius Clay. Again, very difficult issue to have in a high grade and highly, highly collectible when they even come on the market. That's the other thing. There may be some high grades of these out there, but the people that own them aren't putting them up for sale. They're hanging on to them, probably because they think the value is going to go up. So there's not a lot of copies of that issue out there that go for sale. We just looked at one of these. It was one of my eBay examples we looked at again. So this is the first Sports Illustrated cover where Sports Illustrated kept doing annual swimsuit issues. So this is the swimsuit issue in 1964. Again, the swimsuit issues are a subset of this hobby, that there are people that don't collect anything else but swimsuit issues, and they will pay top dollar for them. This, even in a medium grade in like 8, 8.5, will sell for well over $1,000. This is an interesting one. Joe Namath. You got to remember what Joe Namath was like back then. This guy was, I mean, he was a badass. He sat there. They were like 17-point underdogs to the Colts in the Super Bowl. He said that guaranteed a victory. He goes out there and pulls it off. He was dating models 2 and 3 at a time. He was hanging out by pools, surrounded by the media and camera crew. He, played for the Jets in New York, the biggest media market in the country. I mean, this is a great picture. They called him Broadway Joe. This is just a great cover of Joe Namath and a highly, highly collectible issue. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is probably easily top 10 of all Sports Illustrateds for me. This is Roberto Clemente, 1967. His story's documented. You know, he was cut down and killed in his prime. He was one of the best baseball players in the world when he died in 1972. This is his only Sports Illustrated appearance from July 3rd of 1967. I think that's a great photo of him. I love these color bars on the side. Very rare, very collectible. This will sell for issues in the 8 range, 8.5 will sell for a couple $1,000s. I think there's a 9 out there, and maybe a 9 too. The highest grade of this, if it were to hit the market, would be a $5,000 to $10,000 issue, more than likely. Very, very collectible, and just a great picture. All right, hockey guys. Where are my hockey guys at? Hockey collecting is interesting. I mean, hockey is obviously the least popular of the big 4 sports. But those hockey fans, they're super passionate. And man, when they find a collectible they like, they're willing to pay top dollar. So this is Bobby Orr. This is his first to cover from 1967, played for the Bruins, Hall of Famer, iconic player, you know, iconic franchise, all that sort of stuff. The highest graded copy of this issue in existence is a 9.0. It just sold on Heritage in the last few months for over $6,000. So don't sleep on the hockey collectibles. The right star from the right team at the right grade commands a top dollar. And that's a really great issue. Bobby Orr's rookie issue right there. Another interest, so similar to Roberto Clemente, there's another guy, Pete Maravich, who died very, very young. This is Pete Maravich. This is his first Sports Illustrated cover from 1968, March 4th, 1968, when he was still in college, playing for LSU. He appeared on the cover several times, at least twice with LSU and at least once in the pros. The two LSU issues are certainly more collectible. This one more than anything. There's a number of these issues out there. I see them sell in the $6 to $7.5 range. They'll go for, you know, $700 to $1,000. The ones that are 8 and above, I've never seen for sale. My guess is, or if they have, I've just missed them. You know, those are $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 issues. So Pete Maravich has his following and is very collectible. Pete Rose. This is his first issue from 1968. Great cover, by the way. I love this multi-shot at the top of him. I love the green and or the yellow and red combination. Highly collectible. An issue in, I think it was like an 8.5. It might have been a 9. Sold not too long ago for over $5,000 on Heritage. Very highly collectible issue, and not a ton out there graded. So that's Pete Rose in his first issue. Hank Aaron, you know, if it wasn't for the steroid era, it's entirely possible that he'd still be the home run king. This is his first issue from 1969. He made the cover several times with Sports Illustrated, but Hank Aaron's first, very, very collectible and worth a lot. This one, I'm going to say out of everything, this is the most underrated, undervalued issue out there. And I say undervalued, I've never seen one for sale. I think there are only 2 of these graded. So what we're looking at here, this is 1969. This is Pete Rose and Ernie Banks. So this is Pete Rose's second cover. It's Ernie Banks' first cover. Both of those standalone would be highly collectible. To put them together on the same magazine makes this uber collectible. I think there's only 2 of these that have ever been graded. Super hard to find in a newsstand issue. Really impossible to find at a good grade. This is my sleeper of this entire set. If you come across a newsstand issue of this one, get it graded regardless of the condition, because there just aren't any out there. They just don't exist. And I absolutely love this cover. It's an action game shot. They're both facing the camera. Yeah, Ernie Banks' rookie issue and Pete Rose's second, all in the same cover. I love that issue. This is a great one. Very collectible. There are other people that have done lists like this and have put this in the top 10 graded, you know, most iconic issues of all time. This is Secretariat, winning the Triple Crown in 1973. You know, greatest horse, you know, racing horse of all time. Very difficult to find in a newsstand, difficult to find in a high grade. And let's talk about that for a second. All the green on this cover, all of that ink that had to be printed on there easily flakes off. Chips off in handling. When you open the magazine, it flakes off from the spine. Really great issue, really collectible. I saw one of these that sold not too long ago for over $3,000, and it was not the highest graded. There were others that were graded above it. So the 73 Secretariat issue, very, very collectible. And then we wrap up. This is the last one, and then I've got a couple honorable mentions here. But this is Hank Aaron hitting 715 in 1974 in the cover. This is certainly one of the most iconic covers of all time. There are a lot of these graded, really kind of a lot of these issues out there graded. Most of them in the 6 to 7, 7.5 range. But despite the fact that the population reports are strong on this one, Hank Aaron and 715 from 1974, very, very collectible. Okay, so that's my list of the most collectible Sports Illustrated issues from 1954 to 1974. I got a couple of I guess I'll call them honorable mentions here. These are issues that I think probably have the most upside and should be more collectible and go for more than they are. Total wild card here. John F. Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy. This is an issue that came out in December 1960. I think there's one graded, and I think it's not very good, like a 7 or a 7.5. This is an absolute sleeper, in my opinion. I think if somebody could source a newsstand issue of this and get an 8, 8.5, 9, or even higher on that, I think there's just huge upside there. Highly collectible. Not only is it an old Sports Illustrated at a high grade, which is always collectible, the Kennedys themselves bring in an entire different population to the potential buyers pool here. People that just are fascinated by the Kennedys and collect the Kennedys. I think this is a real sleeper. I've been trying to source a newsstand copy of this for a long time. I almost bought one not too long ago, but it was in really rough shape. It was in really bad shape. Probably would have graded out at like a 3 or a 4. But I'm still on the hunt. This is a great one. Definite sleeper and an honorable mention. This one, I'm shocked at this one. I mean, I've seen this sell out there. Issues in the 7 and 8 range for maybe $400 or $500. This is John Havlicek. This is an issue of him from 1966. You've got the Boston Celtics, one of the most iconic franchises in all of basketball, highly collectible. John Havlicek's a Hall of Famer. Every time I say his name, I think of that Johnny Most clip screaming, Havlicek stole the ball. Havlicek stole the ball. The guy's just got so much cachet and pop culture awareness. I love this cover. I love the colors. The green on his uniform just bursts out of there. And the fact that he's standing behind a green and white Celtics championship banner. This is a sleeper for me. I think this one should be valued a lot more than what it is. There's only a handful that have been graded. Again, been trying to source my own newsstand copy of this and haven't been able to do it. But John Havlicek, another honorable mention. I love this one. This is one of my all-time favorites. If you've heard my other podcasts, I'm from Chicago, so I'm a big Bears fan. I did just purchase my first copy of this one. This is Dick Buckus. This is his first cover as a pro. He made a cover when he played for the University of Illinois in college. This is his first pro cover. This is just a badass cover. I mean, look at him. He looks like he's ready to jump across that line and just tear your head off. Great image. You get that full shot of his face. You can see the iconic 51. Buckus is a Hall of Famer. The number's retired. He's an all-time great. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 of these issues that have been graded. One of them's at a 9.0. The last time it sold, it didn't sell for nearly as much as what it should have. So this is another sleeper of mine, this Dick Buckus issue when he's on the Bears from 1970. Really hard to find in a great grade. This came from the dark era, a term that's been coined in this hobby of collecting. It was from the late 60s to early 70s. I think it's like 67 to maybe 71. And it refers to an era when Sports Illustrated kind of used some cheap printing materials, cheap paper, cheap ink that degraded really easily over time, and the ink flaked off really easily from the magazine. So this is a dark era issue and is one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to find in good condition. So Dick Buckus, my third honorable mention. And my last honorable mention, similar to John Kennedy, this is Steve Mcqueen. This is from 1971. He only was on Sports Illustrated once. Again, Steve Mcqueen is a cult figure. There are people out there that adore him and love him. He's kind of got this cult following out there. I think it brings new people into the hobby that would be interested in a graded copy of this issue. There's only a couple of them that have been graded. But this is my fourth and last sleeper and honorable mention is Steve Mcqueen. This is from August 1971. Look at him. He's badass, man. He's got his shirt off. He's riding the motorcycle. He looks like he could just, tear your heart out right there. That's it for this podcast. Really appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe. Please contact me with any questions on anything. I'm on every social media platform. Just search CGC Sports Illustrated. It's the same everywhere. Facebook groups, CGC Sports Illustrated, eBay, TikTok, my email address, cgcsportsillustrated@gmail.com. We'll do it again soon. Thanks.